Your city attorney has filed 3 disorderly conduct charges against a Rochester woman who allegedly called a 5-year-old the N-word at Roy Sutherland Playground.
You know, just when you thought things couldn't get even stupider, the folks over in Rochester, Minnesota decided that they're going to make it even stupider in that they've decided to charge Shiloh Hendrix, the woman who went viral about 4 months ago for calling a child the N-word who was rifling through her bag at the park. Somebody filmed it. They ended up uploading it. It became a national controversy. She ended up getting a bunch of death threats. Members of her family were doxxed. So then she started a give, send, go.
Give me the money. Give me the money. Okay.
That ended up exploding as people were sick of these stories where people end up getting into an argument with a black person and suddenly that gets treated like the greatest crime in humanity in this country. So I thought the story was going to end right there with a bunch of bad people doing ridiculous things, one person getting rewarded extraordinarily for doing something that was inappropriate. But apparently we can't just leave it there. Apparently a woke prosecutor has been thinking about this particular case, molding on this particular case, and has decided to charge Shiloh Hendrix with 3 counts of disorderly conduct because apparently in Rochester, Minnesota, the First Amendment doesn't apply. So essentially, we're watching a trial based on speech crimes. It is ridiculous. It is absurd. It is absolutely insane. And that's what we're going to talk about today. But before we do, I want to thank everybody who funds me for not saying the N-word over at actualjusticewarrior.com/join. Now, the local news ends up saying that she was accused of calling a 5-year-old the N-word.
A Rochester woman who allegedly called a 5-year-old the N-word.
And people out there are judging off of hearsay, false allegations, and not facts.
And I will point out, as we pointed out back in the day, that the age of the child was not confirmed, and I have yet to see any identifying information on the child, and he looks about age 9 or age 10. There's also people who are claiming that the 5-year-old has autism. Also, that was not confirmed at the time. But regardless of all of that, this was a situation where people behaved poorly in a public park. It got filmed, and for whatever reason, which we all know the reason, because it was a white person arguing with a black person, it became national news. And by the way, my perspective on this whole situation is exactly as it was before. A child should not be going through somebody's bag. That is wrong. That is inappropriate. An adult should not be throwing racial epithets at a child, whether the child is 5 or 9, whether the child has autism or doesn't have autism. It makes no matter to me. And it is ridiculous for people to send Shiloh Hendrix death threats, and it was also ridiculous that she raised an extraordinarily high amount of money in response to said death threats. That being said, this was all going on at the same time that black people were raising money for Carmelo Anthony because they liked the idea that he stabbed a white kid in the heart. Make no mistake about it. They were making up all this crazy information about Austin Metcalf, the victim in that particular crime. So I understand the mindset at the time that allowed these events to come to fruition. I just wish that maybe people would have held that same kind of energy for Amy Cooper, who actually did nothing wrong, who was actually under threat from Christian Cooper, who was threatening to take her dog because she refused to obey him in a park. But instead, we're now with this very much inferior case where somebody actually did hurl a racial epithet, and this is the person who got rewarded. And by the way, the charges in the Amy Cooper case happen to have been dropped as well because those were fake, absurd, and ridiculous. And hopefully these charges will not go through either because, again, they have no basis in law in our country. And if Minnesota has a law that can be used to prosecute somebody for saying a word that people don't like, then that law is also unconstitutional.
Sananda, if she's found guilty of the 3 charges of disorderly conduct she has been faced with, Hendrix could face 90 days in jail for each charge or a $1,000 fine for each charge.
So right off the top, I just want to say that this local reporter that's out at the playground is one of the most schlubby dressed people that I've ever seen on TV in my entire life. Now, you guys might be saying, Sean, you like to wear your t-shirts, you don't dress to the 10s or whatever, but in reality, I'm not in the local news media. I do not actually have a dress code, and I'm not just presenting myself as a sloppy person who's reading off my phone in the middle of the segment. When I read off my phone in the middle of a segment, I put up a graphic on the screen so you guys can't see me hunched over reading the article and whatnot, because that would be a ridiculous visual for everybody to see. But apparently it's good enough for the local news. And of course, this guy's talking about the potential consequences for Shiloh Hendrix, which would be her paying a $1,000 fine or suffering some minor jail time. But in reality, this case has no validity. And by the way, this stupid, ridiculous local news segment with the schlubby reporter doesn't actually point out that there's no basis for this prosecution, like at all. Again, you are allowed to hurl racial epithets. It's not a good thing. It's not something that you should do in polite society, but it's not a crime. We have a First Amendment. Cut the nonsense out. Hate speech is not a thing in the United States of America.
He has been faced with. Hendrix could face 90 days in jail.
Now, I also want to point out that it is very unusual that Minnesota has a statute that prosecutes hate speech when hate speech is not a thing. But in addition to that, you can face 90 J's or 90 gays if you are convicted of this statute. And I don't know what facing 90 gays in jail actually means. Maybe they're all part of the same prison gang. Maybe in this particular case, they have to get 90 lesbians because they're sending Shiloh Hendrix to a female jail. I will update you on that aspect of Minnesota law when it comes up, when we review the legal process. So just hold on. We'll find out exactly where they're going to get the 90 gays in order to face Shiloh Hendrix if she's convicted.
The city attorney's office says it took so long to file these charges because of the large amount of public attention surrounding the incident. If you remember back in May, there were several protests held by groups like Journey and the Rochester NAACP calling for Hendrix to face some form of accountability.
So again, one of the reasons why you know this case is absolutely fake and absurd is because the prosecution said the reason that it took so long for them to discover a charge to attach to Shiloh Hendrix is due to the fact that there was so much public attention on the crime. That makes no sense at all whatsoever. It tells us that it's politically motivated, and in fact, they tell us about different various groups who have been protesting and lobbying the government in order to break the law to charge Shiloh Hendrix with these ridiculous statutes. And to be clear, the idea that a high-profile nature of a crime prevents you from doing criminal charges is insane. Again, especially in the state of Minnesota, where they had the very high-profile charging of Officer Derek Chauvin and the other officers involved in the George Floyd incident, and they took no pause and no hesitation in order to factor in whether or not they, maybe have too much attention from the media on this case. In fact, the attention caused them to rush to charge absolutely all of them in that particular case, as we see time and time again. There is no basis for this. They were hoping that the attention died down from the right-wing side. People would stop donating money to Shiloh Hendrix, so they decided at that point in time they were going to intervene, and it's ridiculous. And by the way, we actually learn the true nature of this particular scheme, and I find this to be objectively disgusting.
The potential $3,000 charge may not seem like much compared to over $700,000 Hendrix raised to supposedly protect her family on Give, Send, Go. Rochester Mayor Kim Norton says there are limits to what the law can address.
It is difficult, and I struggle with that, and I think many people struggle with that.
So look, people are going to get mad at me. People are going to say black fatigue repeatedly in the comments of this particular video, like they do on multiple videos, as if that's an original, intelligent comment to leave on a bunch of videos. But if you guys will recall, one of the reasons I had an issue with Miss Shiloh Hendrix is that rather than saying, the emotion got the best of me as this kid was trying to take something from my child, she ended up saying that she called him out for what he was, essentially doubling down on the racial slur, and she was rewarded for that. And I don't like promoting racially divisive narratives, and of course, I obviously condemn fully the idea that this woman would go viral, it would become a national story, people would be threatening and doxing her home, but I just didn't think that this story of everybody acting poorly should have people embracing one person acting terribly in said story. But of course, we end up pivoting to the mayor, who said that she was struggling struggling with this. She is absolutely ripped apart by this particular case, and she looks just like the cat lady you're imagining, and it just goes to show you how insane leadership is in a state like Minnesota. Again, you have discount, wussified, more weak version of Justin Trudeau as the mayor of Minneapolis. In addition to that, you have an up-and-coming Somali ready to take over the mayorship, declaring himself the captain now to his face. You also have Governor Tim Walz, who, I mean, come on, do I even need to add more about Governor Tim Walz? And now we got Mayor Cat Lady talking about how, oh my god, she struggled so hard, this racial epithet from 4 months ago really bothered her, and that's why she decided that she was going to respond to the political pressure by getting the district attorney to refer criminal charges on this matter that is objectively non-criminal. Again, I've talked about this so many times on this channel. There are so few incidents of evil white racism out there from white people to black people that they actually have to gin up hysteria every time a white person argues with a black person in order to make up for the lack of racism that they're in such high demand of. And in reality, there are so many more brutal crimes of violent nature committed by black people against white people. A lot of them are not racially motivated, but some of them definitely are, that get nowhere near this attention, that get nowhere near the media coverage that we're seeing for a woman who hurled some epithets at a public park. I mean, come on, people. We have 4 months of consecutive protests over this. Meanwhile, in Cincinnati, the so-called brawl, which in reality was black mob violence against white people, you have black politicians doing press conferences talking about how the white woman that got sucker punched and knocked out cold after the fight was over, or after she thought the fight was over, and she tried to restrain the people that were stomping the head of one of the people that was on the ground, and how she should be charged with a criminal offense, on how a white person that may have said the N-word in that particular incident incited all the black people to mob up and commit crimes.
6 individuals were charged with aggravated assault, which is a felony. The white guy incited or urged 6 other people to commit a felony.
The method by which this situation has been handled raises serious questions as to whether there's bias involved in the investigation. It also brings into question the possibility of a lack of integrity and whether there's something else to hide.
A narrative that is so ridiculous that in a previous video that we covered on this channel, there was actually this argument on behalf of one of the defendants who wasn't accused of being incited by a racial slur to violence. He was accused of ripping a chain off of the man as he was getting his head stomped, and apparently that was in self-defense of a racial slur. Please, people, you gotta stop.
It is difficult, and I struggle with that, and I think many people struggle with that. But we have to follow the law. We can't. This isn't an emotional response that can be had in the court system.
Yeah, you should follow the law. Guess what? The First Amendment protects racial slurs. There's no hate speech in the United States of America. This is an emotional reaction due to public pressure. It's insane. It's ridiculous. And honestly, you're embarrassing. Also, you sound like Elizabeth Warren, which makes me hate you 10x more.
The city of Rochester says in a case like this, it can't enhance the misdemeanor charge with a hate crime charge. However, Hendrix's recent windfall could disqualify her from seeking a public defender if she chooses to.
So I just want to say that those sentences are both ridiculous and absurd, and I'm going to take them in reverse order because I think one of them actually tells us what this is really all about, which is because Shiloh Hendrix ended up getting so much donation money from Give, Send, Go, they're essentially going to try to use that against her so that she has to pay for her own attorney, because in reality, even though this case is totally illegitimate, even though she should be found not guilty, they're trying to make the process the punishment by running up the bills on her for attorneys in this particular non-crime. But in addition to that, I just want to replay the first part of what Evan Berg said. Again, our schlubby local news reporter who is dressed like an absolute goof out in the field for this segment.
The city of Rochester says in a case like this, it can't enhance the misdemeanor charge with a hate crime charge.
Do you know how stupid that sentence is? That might be the dumbest thing that I've heard all year, and it was uttered by our schlubby reporter over in Rochester, Minnesota. He just said that hate crime enhancements are not available for these charges due to the nature of the charges. And yeah, that should be obvious, but really think about how dumb our society would be if hate crime enhancements were possible for disorderly conduct. For disorderly conduct, they're going to do a hate crime enhancement. This is like an open container law getting a hate crime enhancement, or maybe drunken disorderly conduct with a hate crime enhancement. It's absurd. It's a preposterous notion. We have to pretend that there's any kind of legitimacy here if we're observing this case and we're actually going to break it down and follow it to trial. But in reality, the judge should throw this out immediately and require the district attorney's office to pay fees for attorneys to Shiloh Hendrix. Disorderly conduct with a hate crime enhancement, that's a thing that you actually thought was possible as a reporter, as the on-the-ground reporter. Listen up, bub. You need to get yourself a better suit. You need to get yourself a better mind, and you need to redo this segment with the disdain and the contempt that these charges actually deserve. Evan Berg, I am calling you out. You are the problem. I don't know what the hell you're even talking about. The idea that we should look at disorderly conduct with a hate crime enhancement possibly is one of the most asinine proposals I've ever heard in my entire life. So yeah, I'm totally against this. Congratulations, Rochester, Minnesota. You've actually made me throw my support behind Shiloh Hendrix, because now you've turned a petty argument where everybody acted ridiculous. You've turned a ridiculous give, send, go campaign into a situation where you're actually abusing government power in order to persecute her. Insane, absurd, ridiculous. But you know what? Those are just my thoughts. I want to know what you guys think about all this down in the comments below. As per usual, if you like this video, show them by leaving a like, subscribe for more content, follow me on my social media, support me via the support links in the description of this video. This has been me talking about madness in Rochester, Minnesota. Till next time.